Welcome, friends, to another edition of Wolff Responds. I want to respond today to something that President Biden said, but it's being said by lots of other leading Democrats and Republicans who should know better, and it is overdue for someone to begin to say what has to be said. Luckily, I'm not the only one, but they are not very many. Here's what I'm talking about. It's the kind of nonsense that suggests that the economic competition for the United States coming from the People's Republic of China is nothing to worry about, is not significant, that the Chinese economy has lots of problems, and that anyone who thinks that they're doing great is just not being serious. The president almost used those words a few days ago. And that's all wrong. I don't say that often about President Biden, or for that matter, former President Trump, who said similar nonsense over and over again. I'm an economist. I study what happens in actual economies in the world. My job is not to say what people want to hear, and my job is not to make it pretty if it isn't, or to make it ugly if it isn't either. Here is the truth about China, whether you like the place or not, whether you agree with it or not. Those are perfectly valid issues, and people can take the different sides. But make-believe and denial of what's going on is a bad idea for everyone. So here's the basic reality. 40 years ago, if you made a list of the poorest countries in the world, China would have been on it. China, for a long time, has been one of the poorest countries on this planet. And 40 years ago, the people of China, like the people in most of the countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, had a clear priority, the one thing they wanted above all else. And that was to stop being the poorest countries in the world, to have what we used to call economic development, so they could have decent jobs, decent incomes, provide education, healthcare, and decent housing for their families, for their communities, and for their nation. And 40 years ago, if you had talked to the leaders of any of the countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, they would have told you that's their top priority. Well, 40 years later, I'm going to tell you the results. Far and away, the most successful poor country to overcome its poverty has been the People's Republic of China. That's the reality. For most of the last 40 years, their economy grew at about 6 to 9%. Their GDP, gross domestic product, a rough measure of the total output of goods and services, it grew 6 to 9% per year. The United States, over the same period, grew 2 to 3% per year. No contest. Over 40 years, that kind of difference means that China catches up to the United States, which it did. In a number of areas, it has now surpassed the United States. I'm going to give you just a few of the many possible examples. A few days ago, President Biden raised the tariff. That's a tax on things made in other parts of the world, imported into the United States. The name of that tax is a tariff. The tax on electric cars and trucks made in China and brought to the United States, up until recently, was already a whopping 27.5%. So whatever the price of the electric car or truck coming from China might be, what the Chinese demand for it, if you're an American and you buy it, you have to pay the Chinese what they demand, plus 27.5% more is a tax going to Uncle Sam, a tariff. And a few days ago, Mr. Biden raised it to 100%. If the Chinese truck costs 30 grand, you're an American, you buy it, bring it over here and buy it, you will pay $60,000. This is called in economics protection. It's a protection system. You know who it protects? The people making money off car production in the United States. Why? Because they can't compete with the Chinese. They produce a better car at a lower price. There has been a big competition for the last 15 years in electric cars. You've all heard of Elon Musk and Tesla. What you haven't heard is that the Chinese have outperformed Mr. Musk and Tesla automobiles. And because the Americans didn't and can't compete, they get government protection instead. That's what this is about. It worsens inflation here because it raises the prices of everything. Protection is opposed by lots of people over the years for just that reason. We also protect solar panels. We also protect computer chips. We protect lots of things. You know why? Because we've lost the competition with China. Maybe someday we'll get it back, but we're not going to get it back by protecting industries. You get it back when American industry has to compete, but we pretend that China isn't what it is. If you go to Europe right now, you'll see Chinese electric cars and trucks on the road. They don't have the tariffs we do. They can buy quality at a cheaper price than the United States can. And it's happening to more and more goods. The point of my saying this to you is we ought to be studying how the Chinese did it. You can be very sure that the rest of the world is studying how the Chinese did it and copying them. When the United States was the fastest growing phenomena in the world, people studied what was done here. You're making a mistake, all of you who seem to feel the need to substitute your wish that the Chinese weren't out competing us for the reality. That's a very dangerous way to make your way through life. It's make-believe. It's pretense. And everyone watching sees it. Nobody is fooled when President Biden protects the American industry, car industry, for example, because it can't survive otherwise. That's a sign of trouble and of decline. And you better pay attention and you better do something because it isn't going to go away. It hasn't gone away for the last 30 to 40 years, and there's no sign of it going away now. Politicians who pander to you for votes by telling you what you might like to hear rather than squaring with you about what's going on only make the likelihood of further decline greater than it would have been had you been honest about what is going on. The world economy is changing. The dominant position of the United States is no longer the case. That's the reality. Now the question is, when will we have the political leadership to face it, to explain it to the American people, and to begin to work out a plan for how to handle this situation? And by plan, I don't mean threatening nuclear war or any of those other quote unquote solutions that are worse than the problem being presented. Thank you very much for your attention. If you can support this project, please know that your help will be very much appreciated. Go to our website, democracyatwork.info, for all the details. Welcome, friends, to another edition of Wolff Responds. I want to respond today to a phenomena that is changing the world as we speak. But it is changing the world at the same time that the leaders of the United States are working overtime to deny this change, mostly by acting as if it weren't happening. Let me explain. The change that is going on is a reorganization of the world economy. For most of the last 75 years, since the end of World War II, the United States has been the dominant player in the world economy. It produced the most goods exported around the world. It brought in the most imports from around the world. The US currency, the dollar, was the global currency held by central banks in virtually every country as security, as collateral, you might say, for their own currencies. The American economy dominated also because the American military was the strongest in the world, and the political power of the United States was unrivaled at the time. Yes, there was the Soviet Union, but they were a very small player in the world economy compared to the United States. And while they had nuclear weapons, they had very much fewer of them and were in a much poorer situation to ever use them. So the dominance of the United States was as overwhelming as it has been with any empire, even if you go back to the earliest, the Greek, the Roman, and all the others. The United States was very rich at home, and it had not been destroyed by World War II the way all of our competitors pretty much had. Japan, Germany for sure, but also Britain, Russia, France. Nobody was in a position to question the United States. Indeed, as many of you know, the Marshall Plan of the United States, adopted after the end of World War II, saw the United States lend huge amounts of money to enable countries destroyed by the war to rebuild afterwards. And for most of the last 75 years, the United States has maintained that dominance. Lots of wars in lots of places were required. Lots of money to sustain this kind of an economic powerhouse was required. 700 or 800 military bases around the world exist to secure this economic dominance. And perhaps most important, American politicians, American academics, American mass media, and the American people in general got used to it. And of course, don't want to see it disappear. Unfortunately, it has. We are not anymore the richest economic player in the world economy. The dollar is steadily losing its dominant role to other currencies. Let me summarize it in one dramatic statistic. The United States, together with its major economic allies, Japan, Canada, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany, comprise something called these days the G7, the United States and its economic allies. The new player in the world economy, equal to, or as I'll show you in a moment, larger than the G7, is known as the BRICS, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the original 5, to which 6 new ones were added a few months ago. The key player there, the People's Republic of China. So it's the United States and its allies, the G7, and China and its allies, the BRICS. Each of those countries in both of those 2 groupings keeps a statistic called the gross domestic product. That's a measure of the total output of goods and services each country makes. If you add up the GDP of the United States and its allies, it works out to about 29% of the total output in a year of planet Earth. If side by side with that you put the GDP of the People's Republic of China and its allies in the BRICS, we're talking now about 33% of this planet's annual output. In other words, the BRICS have already surpassed the G7. They were roughly equal back in 2020. The gap between them is growing steadily in the BRICS' favor. This changes everything. What do I mean? Every country on Earth, when it used to have a need to borrow money, to sell bonds, to rearrange its trading arrangements, to solve its burning economic problems, would typically send a delegation of officials to New York or London or maybe one of the other capitals of the G7. Nowadays, when this is happening to many countries, especially in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, but increasingly in parts of Europe as well, there's an option that didn't exist for these countries before. They can go to Beijing or to New Delhi or fill in the blank. And those places can offer very big loans, often at cheap interest rates. They can buy what these countries have to sell. They can sell what these countries need to buy, and so on. Country after country is learning to play these 2 against each other, or if one of them offers better deals, which, by the way, the Chinese typically do, they go with them. And everything changes. It is childish and dangerous to pretend this isn't going on. Let me give you some examples of the pretending and then the suffering when the pretense is shown to be very dangerous. The United States made a decision with Britain to support Ukraine in fighting a war of attrition with Russia. That decision was made early in 2022. When that decision was made, public statements came from President Biden on down. The ruble would collapse. Russia would fall to its knees. Ukraine had a powerful army and would be given weapons and funding from the West. And that would be more than enough to destroy the enemy, Russia. As if to drive the point home, a package of sanctions were agreed. Russia was to be hobbled by having no place to sell its oil and gas because the Europeans would stop buying it. All of those calculations were 100% wrong. They made a terrible mistake. They didn't understand the BRICS. They didn't understand how big they were, how rich they were, and how Russia could and would turn successfully, especially to China and to India, to buy the oil and gas that Europe refused. That nullified the sanctions. To help Russia in countless other ways. That nullified the sanctions. Russia ruble did not collapse. Russian economy is stronger now than it was before the war began. This miscalculation has destroyed huge part of Ukraine, which will never be the same. It has recalibrated global politics in ways that will be with us for generations to come. The world was given a chance to witness how the world has changed. And no one, except perhaps a few Americans and a few of their G7 allies, they may still not see it. They may still be locked into a terrible denial. Here's more evidence. The Biden administration is talking about turning more and more to economic warfare. They didn't learn anything. You know what that's a polite term for? Sanctions. The United States is already the country that sanctions people in the world more than any other. China's not busy sanctioning. Russia isn't either. The United States, imagining itself to be the dominant power, is hitting everybody with sanctions. And guess what? It drives the sanctioned countries to say, okay, don't deal with the United States. If they're going to behave that way, let's reorient ourselves, you guessed it, to the BRICS, which is what's happening. You don't need to be a genius to understand that if one of the two blocks of the world economy is now bigger than the other, with the gap growing, if it has proven its willingness to stand together and support one of themselves, even in a frontal war with the United States and the G7, that we have a wholly new situation. We can try to bluff and bravado our way through, listening to Janet Yellen go to China and wave her fingers and tell them how to behave after they've grown faster than the United States for every one of the last 30 years is laughable, except that it shows a denial of what is happening in the world and a phenomena in which the American leaders, Republican and Democrat alike, Biden and Trump together, keep talking as if their social role was to lead Americans into not facing the changed reality that is all around them. 143, I believe it's now 146 of the 195 countries in the UN have recognized Palestine. It's the same phenomena. And it's only becoming more clear. Don't be fooled by leaders who want to pretend they're leading something that isn't there anymore. No free world, no leadership of the free world. That nonsense is gone. And we will all be better off if and when we get leaders who understand it, who face it, and who present to the American people the new and different choices that have to be made to come to terms with the new global economic order, rather than tilting against windmills, as the old novel of Don Quixote laid it out. Caught up in a fantasy of a bygone world never was a recipe for success. If discussions like these strike you as valuable, please understand that they cost money to produce. If you can contribute something, please do. And the easiest way, go to our website, democracyatwork.info, and there you will find the ways to donate. Thank you.